Okay, I'm still on. I had to make sure that I didn't turn myself off. One of my favorite places in the whole world to be is Lake Michigan. Any beach people here? You love the beach? Everybody's hand just went up. Oh my gosh. Any people who are like Anakin Skywalker? I hate sand. Anybody? Okay, we got one person. You're entitled to that hatred of sand because it is irritating. I don't like when it's windy and I'm trying to eat my sandwich on the beach and the sand is getting in the sandwich. I know it's called a sandwich, but it's not supposed to be like that. You know, like sand is not supposed to go in there. It's not called sandwich because it has sand in it. But I don't like that part of the beach, so I'm with you on that one, Eugene. But it's my happy place. We have been going to Lake Michigan north of Muskegon in a little place called Whitehall for the last, 12, 15 years. That has been our place, our happy place. So you all have a happy place, right? Like, this is where I go. This is where I connect. This is where I find peace. I have that spot. My family has that spot, and it is over on the shores of Lake Michigan. We even go there sometimes in the winter to see the ice on the water because it's that cool. It's that beautiful of a spot. And so when we're there, what do we do while we're on the beach? You sit and you look at the water. And you go for a walk, and you look at rocks, and sometimes you swim, and sometimes you eat, and sometimes you grab a drink, or that's really all I do on the beach. It's not like we don't have parties. I don't bring boom boxes. We don't grill out or do big fancy things. We just sit and stare at the water. That's my favorite thing in the whole world to do. Now, I invited a good friend of mine. His name's Eric, and he lives in Chicago. And he was doing a road trip to Michigan, and I don't get to see him in person very often. And so we were going to be over near Lake Michigan, and he was going to be near Lake Michigan, so we decided to meet up. And I was like, oh, I can show him my happy place. This is going to be great. One of my best friends in the whole world, and one of my favorite spots in the whole world. And so we're out on the beach, and down comes Eric and his wife, Linda. They're walking down the beach. I'm like, oh, they're here. And I got him a chair and everything. Like, I brought extra food and chair. And we're sitting there, and I'm like, isn't this great? He's like, yeah, this is beautiful. It's great. So how long you do this? I was just like, what do you mean how long we do this? Sunset's in about 5 hours. He's like, you're going to sit here for 5 hours? It's like, yeah. That's what we do. This is the beach. You enjoy the beach. He's like, I don't think I can sit here for 5 hours, man. Like, I got to do something. Now, Eric's personality is different than mine. He is a board game lover. He loves board games. He loves events. He loves to do things and have fun and make it special and then bring people into it. So it's a little bit outside of his personality to sit staring at the water for 5 hours. But I didn't think of that. I wasn't thinking so other people have different happy places and things that make them joyous. And so I had to adjust myself that day. Like, okay, so how about we go explore something in town, and then we'll do this and this and get you settled in, and then we come back for sunset. He's like, perfect. That's my idea of a good day. And he's like, really? Like, you were going to sit here the entire time and just stare at the water? I was like, yeah, that's what we do. At least once a week in the summertime, we're out there staring at the water, hours on end. And he's like, wow, I can't imagine doing that. Different personalities. I'm not knocking Eric. He has a different thing that makes him happy. I got different, but I found it interesting that I could have something that I absolutely loved, and I invite a friend into it, and for him, sitting there staring at the water for 5 hours is going to be torture. And for me, it's heaven. And we're in the same place. We're absolutely in the same place, doing the same thing. One person is experiencing it as bliss. One person is experiencing it as boredom. Have you ever noticed that? Like, you've been doing something like, this is what I do, this is what I love. And then someone comes in, they're like, oh, I hate this. You know, like a movie. You're like, you're going to love this movie. And you all sit down and watch the movie together. And you're like, so, wasn't it the best movie ever? And they're like, no, I hated it. It's like, oh. You're watching the same thing, right? And you're sitting there in the same space, watching the same thing, but your experiences of that thing are different. Or a song. You're like, oh my gosh, I love this band. You're going to love this song. Like, I love Jeremy Wilson. He's one of my best friends, and I love playing music with Jeremy Wilson. But confession moment, if you're watching, I'm sorry. I don't like reggae. He loves reggae. And so I will play reggae songs with him because he loves to play reggae. But I'm not a big fan of reggae. I just don't hear music that way. That's his bag. We're in the same moment, doing the same thing. We're experiencing different things. Now, I've grown a little bit, and I've got a little bit more appreciation for reggae than I did before I met Jeremy. But the same thing. Like, we're playing the same song. We're playing the same instrument. Like, he's got a guitar, I got a guitar. And we're having a different experience of that same moment. So you know what this feels like, right? You've all experienced something very similar, whether it's showing your favorite movie, taking someone out to your favorite restaurant, a song, or your favorite happy spot, and somebody in the same space as you is experiencing what you're experiencing in a very different way. That's a little bit of what's going on in this passage today. A little bit of encountering the resurrected Christ. We're in Easter. This is the third week of Easter. And Easter is about encountering the resurrected Christ. What does that even mean? You know, that's interesting. I grew up in the church. I grew up putting all of the information I could get of God into my brain. I studied doctrines and I studied the Bible. I even got like the special highlighters so I can do different color highlighting in my Bible. I thought I was the most spiritual, wonderful person that existed because I had all the information up in my brain. But just because you have information in your brain doesn't mean it translates out into living in loving ways. Have you experienced that before? Someone's got all the right information in their head about God, but your experience of that person is someone who's maybe judgmental, or somebody who's a little bit mean, or somebody who has a little bit of a power trip going on. Our experience of God in that moment, we're experiencing the same God. And yet the experience of that same God can be different for different people. And so the disciples here in this moment, they encounter the risen Christ. They encounter the resurrected Christ. And their brains are full of all of the things that their culture has taught them, their families has taught them, their education system has taught them about what this moment will mean. And yet, they have a very different reaction than what we would expect. They've been expecting the Messiah to come, show up in the person of Jesus for the last, 1,000 years. They've been expecting this moment to happen. And then it's here, and they experience it very differently. Their experience of that resurrected Christ terrifies them. So I had to jump into this passage this week. I only had like a couple of days to figure out what in the heck this passage meant. And it's a tough passage on top of that. So the first part I noticed is that Jesus ain't a ghost. This is a really interesting part of the thing. He shows up. He's already died. Like, he was betrayed. He was crucified. He died. He was buried in a tomb, and it was covered with a large rock. And then the women show up to do the embalming process, and they roll the stone away. They didn't roll the stone away. The stone was rolled away, revealing that Jesus is not in there. And everyone's like, where did he go? Who took him? Who stole him? What is going on? Because they didn't expect, nobody expected a physical bodily resurrection to happen. And yet here in this moment, it's happening. There's whispers of things going on in the book of Luke. Jesus just took a really long walk with these two guys on the road to Emmaus. It says there are two disciples, and they're talking about all this stuff happening in the world. It's like, yeah, this guy Jesus showed up. He came to town. We thought he was the Messiah, and then all of a sudden he's, dead and crucified. He was betrayed, and then all of a sudden he's gone. Nobody knows where he is. This is like the first sighting of Jesus, but they can't recognize him. They don't recognize him, and he's walking on the road with them. They get to the house, and then he breaks bread with them, and gives them bread, gives them wine, and all of a sudden, as soon as he breaks the bread, their eyes are open, and they're like, it's him. And then Jesus just like, poof, disappears like a magician or something. It's just like gone before their eyes. And then they hightail it back to where they were, which is pretty fast. They probably walked a good 3 to 4 miles. So they run back and they're telling the disciples about this moment. So when when the passage starts off with, they were talking about this, what were they talking about? These are those disciples coming back to the group of people still in Jerusalem, where all this stuff just went down. Like, this is the Sunday of the resurrection. All this stuff just went down. It's now sunset. And these two guys show up at their door and say, we saw Jesus. They've already heard these rumors that Jesus was not in the tomb. There was an angel that said these things about Jesus. What has even going on here? They don't know what's going on. This is not something you expect when your loved one passes away, that the body is just going to be gone. And then all of a sudden you start hearing like rumors like, oh, we saw him walking around. He was with us. He talked with us. He broke bread with us. And then all of a sudden, Jesus is in their midst. So this is where this passage picks up. The huge disappointment of the disciples. They wanted Jesus to become king and then defeat in a military rebellion against Rome, defeat them, establish themselves as the global superpower, and everybody's going to come to them and bow down. That was their cultural expectation in their brains about what it meant that the Messiah has showed up amongst us. We are now going to be the most powerful people on the planet. Okay? That didn't happen. Jesus allows himself to be arrested. He allows himself to be crucified. And then he's buried in a tomb, helpless. And everyone's expectations at this moment are shattered. They are utterly destroyed. They do not know what to do in this moment, because all of the things that they expected Jesus to do, he did none of them. And they've been walking with this guy for 3 years. And now something different is happening, and they can't quite put it together. What is going on? Why is he dead? And now why is he, like, rumors of him being alive again? And then poof, here he is. While they were talking about this, Jesus himself stood among them and said to them, peace be with you. And they were startled and terrified and thought that they were seeing a ghost. I mean, wouldn't you? If that happened, think about it. Like, just pull this story out of the Bible and just take all the Bible names out of it and all the Bible places out of it and all the contents the same. How are you going to react to this moment? You know, take the religion out for a minute and just think about how you would feel as a human being. It's like this loved one that we, followed, and he's dead, and now he's gone, and now there's rumors of him walking around, and then poof, he's standing in our midst. Of course you're going to pee your pants, right? Like, oh my gosh, what just happened? How did he get here? They're obviously, it must be a ghost, must be something. So there's a couple things I noticed. It says he himself. Now the Bible is really fun to really dive into some of the words of the Bible. And when it uses a double pronoun, it's making a point. He himself is standing here. This is not half a Jesus, not a spirit Jesus. This is an actual physically present, I am here with you, amongst you, like I was, but resurrected. This he himself moment is really, really important. Luke is trying to emphasize, this is really that guy. The one who walked with you, who taught you all those things about love and compassion and kindness. That he's here. It's really him. Love really did win out. This is the way to live. The way that Jesus taught us to live is the actual way to live that conquers death. We don't have to have faith in violence and power. We can have faith in love, because love wins out in the end. That's what this resurrection moment is teaching the disciples. It's like, it's him. It's really him. It really worked. Love did it. Love conquered death. Like, it actually did it. He himself is here. So this moment where it does a double pronoun, he himself, that's really important. Trying to emphasize it happened and it worked. And then it says that he stands among them. And the Bible really likes symbolic language. It was like, yeah, he was standing in the middle of them. But there's also a richness to that metaphor, where the resurrected Christ stands among the community of gathered people. It's not just, well, he showed up and he was standing in the middle of them. Let's move on with the story. That was a nice detail. The Bible adds details to add nuance and to add symbolism, and it layers upon layers of like this beautiful textured paintings that go over top of one another. And for Jesus to stand among the disciples in the middle of them, it means more than just like, oh, he was like in the center of the room and everyone was around him. It means that where the gathered people of God come around the mission of God to proclaim God's love, The resurrected Christ stands in the midst of that. When we were here baptizing Sophia, and they said we do, and you said we do, the resurrected Christ stood amongst us. In the middle of us. It wasn't like standing physically in the room, but the resurrected Christ stands among us when we gather in the name of God and do the things that further God's love in this world. That's what we're to be about. And the resurrected Christ is a presence that enables, enlivens, and makes the things that we do vibrant, full of life and love when we do them according to how God taught us to live. And this is the funny thing. They were terrified and disturbed. They're experiencing the resurrected Christ. You think that you would be overjoyed, excited, happy, exuberant, but they're terrified and they're afraid because all of a sudden they're met with their own failure in this moment. You realize they took off. Jesus was arrested and they hightailed it out of the city and they're like, we're next, we better run. And Peter was one of the ones, he's like, no, I'm going to stick with you even if it means that I die with you. And Jesus is like, actually, you're going to deny me 3 times before the rooster crows twice. He's like, no, I'm never going to do that. Never, ever, 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 ever. I'm sticking with you to the end. And a little servant girl by a fire, he's like, hey, do I know you? You were with that guy, right? He's like, no, I don't know that guy. I don't know what you're talking about. 3 times he denies him and realizes the rooster crows. He's like, oh my gosh, he was right. Have you ever run face to face into your own failure? It's like, that's not a pleasant experience. That is not a pleasant experience at all. But if you're going to encounter the resurrected Christ in our midst, you have to encounter your own humanity. You can't pretend you're like this glorious, flawless being because it doesn't work. Religion sometimes can give you a good cloak. I was really good at being a religious person when I was young. I said all the right things, I did all the right things, I showed up at all the right places, and then I stayed away from all the right things, and I didn't use this language, and I didn't do this and this and this, all this stuff I didn't do, and I did everything right, but I didn't encounter the resurrected Christ. I didn't encounter that resurrection experience that brings me into contact with my own humanity because I didn't want to see that. I don't want to see all the areas that I'm flawed. I don't want to see the areas where I'm weak. I don't want to see any of that. I want to pretend I'm the greatest person in the world. And we all want to do that. And so what I found myself doing was I was living an impersonation of who I thought I should be, or who I thought I was expected to be, and I wasn't really understanding who I was. But the resurrected Christ brings us into contact with our humanity. And at first it's terrifying. You're like, oh wow, look how not great I am. There's all this stuff that I got to work on. There's all these flaws. There's all these things inside of my brain, inside of my heart that need to be worked out. But if you don't see them, you can't work on them. And if you hide from them, then you never really evolve out of them. So seeing the resurrected Christ is a powerful experience that brings you into contact with you at the depths of your being, flaws and beauty in the same moment. And we tend to look at the flaws more than anything. But that's the moment. That moment is terrifying. One of my favorite spiritual teachers, Richard Rohr, says, the truth will set you free, but it might make you miserable first. The truth will set you free, but it might make you miserable first. Encountering Christ among us can be terrifying when we're not aligned with love. We can all be experiencing the same God, and God is love. There is nothing threatening about God. There's nothing judgmental or punishing or retributive about God, because God is love. But that love is absolutely fierce. And when you get in the presence of someone who really loves you, and you try to put on the show, you're like, I'm the greatest person in the world. Look at this, look at this. They're like, I know you. Come on. You experience that with your family sometimes. Like you could put on a good show with maybe your friends or your coworkers, but then you get around like your parents or your kids or your grandkids, and you're like, yeah, but you're just this. We know you. And there's a beauty of that because it brings you into the contact of your humanity. It brings you down into that contact. Like I don't have to pretend to be somebody. I just have to know who I am and live this out. Live this truth out. So the truth will set you free. Because once you stop trying to be so perfect, you can finally be good. You have all this emotional energies. And you're not trying to put on a show all the time. You're like, no, I'm just actually going to be me. I'm the best version, the most loving version of me that I can be. That happens when you're not trying to do the impersonation of who you think you ought to be. And that's when you encounter the resurrected Christ there. And this next passage, I got to share some nerdy Greek with you because it's fun. It's the Greek word ego eimi. And the Greek word ego eimi is in here. And I have to share the nerdy Greek with you because it's fun. He said to them, why are you frightened? And why do doubts arise in your hearts? Look at my hands and my feet. See that it is I myself. There's the ego eimi. See that it is I myself. Touch me and see, for a ghost does not have flesh and bones as you see here. This is really interesting. The ego eimi is there. He's first saying, look at me. To look upon the resurrected Christ is transforming. We will not see a physical resurrected Christ amongst us, but we will see the resurrected Christ amongst us, in us, within us. That's where we encounter the resurrected Christ, in this state of the world. The resurrected Christ is within us and within all of you. And so to gaze and look at the resurrected Christ is to look at one another's humanity too, with compassion and love. And not demand that another person try to conform themselves to our expectations of them, but to learn, listen, and encounter them on their terms. Encounter them as they understand themselves. And love that version of them. And not try to twist them into a more loving, acceptable person that, was more palatable to me, and then I'll love them. No, love encounters them on their turf. And to encounter the resurrected Christ amongst us means to encounter the resurrected Christ on someone else's turf of their humanity. And not try to treat them as an other or an object or a commodity or a puppet or a pawn or anything. To encounter them in their humanity is to encounter the resurrected Christ. Just as it is to encounter us in our humanity is to encounter the resurrected Christ. And we have to look. We have to see people as they are and what they love and what they fear and what their weaknesses are and what their strengths are. That's to see the beauty of the human that stands before you. And you have to look at that. He says, look at my hands and my feet. The wounds of Christ show his affiliation with us. We don't have to try and be uber spiritual. We don't have to try and be some kind of Jedi master that never touches the ground when they walk because we're so hyper spiritual. We have to be human. Jesus stands among them as a human being and yet God. And here he's like, I still have the wounds. They're not scars. They are not healed, but they're not painful to Christ anymore. They're wounds. And I think that's an important distinction to make. It never talks about the scars in Jesus' hands because scars are healed over wounds. And Jesus says, no, touch the wound in my hand. I am still wounded on your behalf. I am still bearing the wounds of humanity in my body and flesh, even in resurrected form. So, scars, not so much. Wounds, yes. But they don't give Christ pain anymore. They're like, whoa. Hands and feet, you were crucified, you were dead, you were buried, and now you stand among us as a human. And then he says that ego eimi, it is the I am. This is confusing if you don't know Old Testament language. When Moses is watching this shrub that's on fire that's not being consumed, and that shrub is the presence of God saying, hey, go to Egypt and tell Pharaoh to let my people go. And Moses is like, nah, I'm not going. I'm not going. And God's like, no, you should go. You should totally go. I'll be with you. Well, what's your name? How do I know? Who am I going to tell them sent me? And God responds. There's a very beautiful mystical passage in Exodus. He says, tell them the I am is with you. So that those words, the I am, is the name of God. God is, the word is. That's what God is. God is love, right? To complete the sentence. But God is being. God is existence. God is the ground of all reality and existence that is. And then we overlay things on top of that. But to really be in contact with God is to be in contact with this present moment as it is. Your humanity as it is. Their humanity as it is. That is the moment here. This moment when Jesus says, it's the I am here. It is I. The ego eimi. Ego eimi means the I am is with you. The I am, The God that was present in that flaming shrub in Exodus, talking to Moses, is standing here now with flesh and bones and wounds in my hands and feet. Standing amongst you. The I Am is here with flesh and bones. They're having a hard time with that. I mean, let's not blame them. Like, we have 2,000 years of hearing this story over and over and over and over again. We're like, yeah, this is how the story goes. But if you've never heard the story before, you got to understand that they're going to doubt about that. They don't know what it means. Doubt is the vestibule through which all must pass before they can enter into the temple of wisdom. So if you ever don't understand something, but you're just believing it because you ought to, you know what? It's okay to pull that thing out, examine it, question it, look at it in all honesty. Doubt is the vestibule through which all must pass before they can enter into the temple of wisdom. If you never question what you believe, if you never pull it off the shelf and look at it and examine it and turn it this way and that way and say, well, how does this work? And even discard some things and adopt new things. Like, if you're not changing and evolving in your faith, like, what's happening? What's going on? It's okay to change. It's okay to doubt things that you've held on to for 25 years and then to look at it and say, well, actually, I'm a different person than when I adopted that thing. Because everything in your life, every value, every action, every belief that you're going to adopt into your inner being where the resurrected Christ dwells has to pass through the doors of doubt, questions. Because it's the only way that you can shape that thing to be yours. Like, think of all those things that you believe. It's like somebody handed you these trinkets and like, all these things are important. And you ever have those key rings? And you're like, I don't remember what this key is for. My dad had this key ring. He was a custodian at an elementary school, and there was a lock for every door. I don't know how the man understood what lock was for what door, but it was on that little extender thing too, like this, and then you let it go and it snap back into place. And the key ring was this big, had all these keys on it. And it was like, well, what's this one's for? Sometimes you'd be like, I really don't know. I'm not really sure. This has always been there. We collect things that we believe. We collect things that were handed to us. Like, hey, you need to believe that. You need to believe that. You need to believe that. Then we just put them on the key ring. Like, oh yeah, I ought to. And then we forget why they're even there, or what they're for, or who gave it to us. Sometimes it helps to test those keys and find out if there's even still a door around in your life that it works for. It's really important to do that, because those are the ways that we adopt the belief to be our own. Encountering Christ among us means encountering the humanity around us and your humanity, which means that sometimes you're going to doubt and sometimes you're not going to know. It doesn't matter. You don't have to have everything up here in your brain figured out, because your heart's already figured it all out. God has written the law of God on your heart already. It's already all figured out. You just have to try and get it up to your brain sometimes. And sometimes, you ever know something but you can't remember the words? And you're like, oh, it's just on the tip of my tongue. I can't remember it. But it's logged in there somewhere. It's a part of you, and it's part of living. Just because you can't recall the words of it doesn't mean it isn't guiding your life. And so there are things that you're going to know and believe on a deeper level than your cognizant brain can put words and labels upon. And that's okay. The things that really guide us are really deep within us, and our brain doesn't even have access to it. You ever do something, you're like, why do I do that? I keep doing this thing. I don't know why I do that. That's your memory of your body and your heart and your nervous system playing out. It happens that way. And so here's the key here. Then he said to them, these are the words that I spoke to you while I was still with you, that everything written about me in the law of Moses, the prophets, and the Psalms must be fulfilled. Then he opened their minds to understand the scriptures. This is crazy, because they have been taught. They have gone through school. They have gone through education. They have a community. They have beliefs that are thousands of years old. They have a temple system. They have a worship system. They have a community system. Everything has been placed in their brains. And it wasn't until this moment that their eyes are open to see and understand what the scriptures are talking about. He's like, I told you all this stuff already, right? Even Jesus taught them this stuff. I'm teaching you things that you ought to know. I'm telling you that I'm going to die and that I'm going to be resurrected and that love is going to win. And they're like, oh, yeah, sure. I told you this stuff already. Here I am standing, and love has won, and it's standing before you in its victorious form. And I told you this was going to happen, but you couldn't understand it because your hearts and your minds were not open, because you encountered the human person of Christ, but not the resurrected human person of Christ. That was the thing that made the difference for them. He said, this is the fulfillment of everything that I've been telling you about. And sometimes you just can't understand things and how they work in love. Like if you start defining love, it gets really weird and stuck. But their minds are open. Their hearts are open when they encounter the resurrected Christ. And then he explains everything again. And this is the moment when they encounter the resurrected Christ as he really is. Encountering the Christ cannot be done in your brain, but in your relationships. You can work out all the stuff in your brain you want to. It's fun. I have lots of degrees. It was great to get those. They shaped me. But until you can live it out in the relationships around you, it has not been adopted as yours. It's just floating around in your brain somewhere. And love is the thing that is one. And there's the thing, we grow up in religion. We grow up in a religious culture, whether you have gone to church or you haven't. There are things you were handed. These are valuable things. You need to do it this way and not this way, and rules and all this other stuff. But the thing is, what would it look like to see the resurrected Christ burst from the tomb of your heart? That's the question of Easter. A Benedictine monk asked me that question when I was 32 and I had never thought of the resurrection that way. You know, I live in this fear chamber of fear that I'm like, oh, I can't do this, and I can't believe that, and I can't show this part of me, and nope. What would it look like if that tomb burst open and the resurrected Christ came on out? And I just lived as the human being that I am and encountered your humanity as you are. So some questions here. If love was your primary guide, what would you say? What would you stop saying? What would you do? What would you stop doing? And more importantly, I think, who would you become if love was your guide? That's what it means for the resurrected Christ to burst from the tomb of your heart, is to have faith that love wins out. Not power, not dominance, not violence, not coercion, but love. Faith in God means faith in love as being the most powerful force of the universe. Psalm 4 is our benediction today, retold by Malcolm Guyton. It says this: till troubles cease and only joys remain, take refuge in the shelter of his love, who hears your call and feels your pain, who does not keep his distance high above, but brings his light into your little room, nestles and settles with you like the dove in its familiar dove coat, from the womb of Mary to her house in Nazareth, the upper chamber to the empty tomb. He comes to share with you every breath and to commune with you to every heart that opens to him. He will bring new birth for every ending, offering a new start. Lie down in peace and trust and take your rest, safe in the love of one who will never part. Amen.